Hey, this is Jose Rodriguez.
And it's Chris.
All right, and we're talking about the thin blue line. So let's start with the first question. What are the main characteristics of the reflexive mode following Nichols as well as Williams?
Hmm. Well, well, based on Nichols' point, there's the filmmaker's engagement with its audience, um, presenting the historical world along with the issues and problems representing it.
Right.
Um, as what is documentary and how it's constructed and represented.
Right.
Um, tackle realism and so on. There's a lot to go into this topic based
And
on
that,
Nichols'
and
points.
yeah, that's Nichols. What
Hmm.
you were referencing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he has a lot of points.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like traits to the reflexive mode according to Nichols. I think what stood out to me the most was he presents it in page 25. He says it's talking about the historical world and problems and issues of representing it.
Hmm.
And also the fact that he mentions that compelling documentary isn't necessarily a good documentary,
Yeah.
and how the reflexive mode is kind of like um, competes or just contradicts really like the direct cinema, which is kind of like that fly on the wall
Hmm.
idea. And just like you said, the reflexive mode is just a lot more direct with the audience.
Yeah, and like and there's criticism of that, like how these type of documentaries attract the audience, but I feel like that's also like an advantage of these type of documentaries is to engage with your audience. So subject matter actually feels important and it enhances your goal at the end of the day as a filmmaker.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think the key word is like truth, right? Like figuring out truth,
True.
like finding truth, especially like in history,
Hmm.
um, and just really paying attention, uh, bringing attention to the way history is presented and how
Hmm.
we digest these images and how we perceive all this information.
Yeah.
That's a reflexive, essentially.
Uh, yeah, and also like Williams, he pointed out that documentaries they're not fiction, of course. However, they should borrow the fiction storytelling aspects into
Right, right,
making documentaries. And I agree with Williams because I feel like with Thin Blue Line, technically it's a documentary, but he goes and said it's just a series of reenactments of a historical event. And I feel like that's appropriate for this type of film. Then just by the numbers documentary, be like, this was what happened, this is what happened. It's like this makes it more engaging and also proves Nichols' point of engaging with the audience, of course.
right,
So I think they both made major points at the end of the day.
right. And I think, yeah, I also like that part of Williams on page 20 and
Hmm.
how he says, like, borrowing these elements from narrative. And I think, you mentioned uh, the reenactments themselves are just like narrative, right? And
Hmm.
I also think the style that the Thin Blue Line or Arrow Morris uses in the Thin Blue Line, that film noir, like detective, like
Yeah.
films. So he's not just incorporating like narrative, but he's also using like stylistic, um, like visual elements from past popular narratives, like film noir in this case.
Yeah. It's very yeah, I do agree. It's very noir style story. And it's poking a lot of questions about these supposed evidence that the cops found during this crime, and really the evidence is not as helpful as they think it is,
Right, right, right.
basically.
Um,
Yeah, it's just hearsay and just badly placed items.
yeah, and what did you think of Nichols's distinguishing like the formal elements of reflexive mode and versus the political?
Yeah, I thought about this, and I feel like this was the show, this film, um, it's definitely both because at at the end of the day, a documentary is supposed to be informative no matter what. So it's supposed to inform what happened during this specific crime, but it also exposes the political side of things, like especially like how crimes are just investigated, and not even just that, just dictated the end results of like this poor man. And you can tell this guy's not a killer. He's just too relaxed, just didn't do anything. It just got, falsely accused and went to prison for a crime he hasn't attempted. And they just say, oh, because he looks like a hippie, he looks weird. And it's just raised a prejudice of like this of the system shows like, so basically anyone could go to jail just based on that alone,
Right.
the evidence doesn't even add up. And I feel like it was a very political aspect, like was that mis
Yeah.
mistreating a case basically.
Right. Political, as in, he Morris is drawing attention
Yeah,
to like the
yeah, silly politics basically. Yeah,
right, and here where he's making a film about like the justice system, how it's
yeah.
working well for
Hmm.
some people, and in this case with like dire consequences because this guy's like on death row.
Yeah,
um
I mean I mean he got out, well, no compensation sadly, but yeah.
yeah,
But
and
in this movie, he was on death row, and it was really unfair for this man just to be on here just for being falsely accused based on his appearance, basically.
right, and the formal elements, just like you already mentioned the narrative aspect of it, like the reenactment. So like this film itself, from a formal standpoint, it's also very reflexive. So
Hmm.
they definitely have both. It's definitely formally reflexive and politically reflexive.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's a very complex film, but I feel like it does a job at both, both executions, basically, of what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I saw on page 30 on Nichols that he says both utilize techniques that jar us. And he references like the alienation effects from Brecht and the Russian formalist, the
Hmm.
idea of making things strange. And
Hmm.
I think Morris definitely does that with the reenactments.
Yeah,
That this slow motion, the chocolate malt like just flying, like
yeah,
you know, it doesn't. We don't like really see this in slow motion in real life, of course, but it's like, and we might not even pay attention to this like on the everyday life, like you end up throwing it and it just falls and that's it, right? But we're not like constantly just thinking about it, and like, and I think it's really, it speaks to that alienation effect because it's making this like mundane like act of like a shake falling on the ground, and like just making it like strange because now it's presented very cinematic.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I just think about the man with the movie camera, which has been referenced throughout many of the readings. But yeah, because what that was supposed to be is like you're recording life, but you're also recreating life at the same time. So I, I guess like based on that ground foundation of that film, you can see like what you just pointed out, like the imagery of this film, like recreating how the shake is thrown, or even how the car drove off, or even sometimes how the car looks. Sometimes it has a bumper sticker, sometimes it doesn't. It's a different sticker. It's just like you're recreating life at the end of the day, and I feel like that's what like the reflective mode is at the end. Like and Mars did a very excellent job achieving that goal of that theory.
Yeah, and just continuing on all these, like, our the second question here, which characters are present in the thin blue line? I mean,
Hmm.
that's what we just been talking about too, but also just to add to that, just the way, like how the structure of the film itself, like on a grand scheme, like how we're used to documentary being like past documentary traditions being like these like coherent, like this
Hmm.
coherent narrative about what's or rhetoric about what's going on or what's being presented. And here he's just like juxtaposing like just social actors talking about their experience with this case, and then just cutting to a complete different story that's contradicting the story we had just seen prior.
Hmm.
So that's the reflexive side, right? Like we're as viewers we're used to seeing this coherent rhetoric, and now we're
Hmm.
just constantly just like, okay, who's telling the truth, who's not, because these stories don't match up, and he is presenting visually also how these stories don't match up through the reenactments. So he's definitely like making a point of it. um, which brings me to the next question: do we ultimately agree with or disagree with the classification of the film as a reflexive documentary? Why or why not? um,
I mean, you could go first. Like, I have to
yeah,
think.
I mean, we definitely made a case for how it is reflexive. I think we just pointed out all that. um,
It's kind of complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, as we were talking earlier, like it just seems like it's definitely an example of the reflexive mode, but it's definitely multi-layered. I think as we progress through our readings and each week, we're starting to realize that like documentary films that have been shown as an examples of other documentary modes have also been used for this particular one. Like I think they mentioned one of the readings mentioned who like killed Vincent Chin, and then that was also presented in a different mode.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, so yeah, I mean, it definitely would be part of the reflexive mode, but it's
Yeah,
definitely multi-layered. It could also be, uh, in a way, I would say like the participatory mode.
yeah, I can see that. Yeah, because it does engage with its audience a lot. Like,
Right. Even, it's through interviews, the example we saw was like on the street, but still it's this engagement. I think that's the essence of it all.
is there engaging with like not just the subject matters involving the crime, but just us as an audience, just ask us like, do you really believe what these guys are saying? I'm like, I don't know. That is a good question, and I think that is like very interesting. That it's kind of participatory, but like Tory, but like it is reflected because it still has that reflective quality of like engagement with the audience, and you could argue that it's part of the reflective mode as well because they both have that aspect of the audience participating into with along with film. And I mean, there's sort of core elements of the end of the day, so I think it is a reflective film, and it's just I do agree with what you say. It is multi-layered because there's a lot going on. You can even say it's just a regular movie, and I'll be fine with that because it's an interesting story at the end
Right.
of the day and the
Right.
presentation.
Definitely.
Yeah,
And then we're asked to describe the visual aspects of the reenactments in the film,
yeah,
and we kind of
yeah,
up to.
yeah. Based what I remember on this, yeah, like the visual aspects is very interesting because they're kind of mundane, but they're filmed in an interesting way, but they repeat itself. But the thing about the visual is, despite you seeing it so many times, it's about the little details that this film focuses on. and each time you see things like, wait, this doesn't add up. Like sometimes this person will be in the left of the person, or sometimes the person will be in the back seat. There'll be a sticker on the cart. Sometimes there's no sticker. Coffee is in the wrong hand. She didn't think to throw coffee. She threw something else.
Right.
It's just like that's basically the visuals is repeating imagery, but you
Right.
wouldn't know what it is because it keeps changing. And I think that's what makes the visual like aspect interesting because it's just showing you like small details do matter. And no matter how you tell it, if you change one small detail, it will be like, hey, this doesn't add up. And
Yeah,
Morris did it brilliantly
I agree.
for that execution.
What stood out to me a lot was like the slow motion of the reenactments, um,
Mm-hmm.
which, again, it's that drawing attention to something like that detail, like you just said, the repetition, the lighting,
Mm-hmm.
this
Yeah,
type of
it's
lighting found
oh
like,
yeah, it's a wolf. I love the film, how it looks visually. It's great.
yeah.
It's
And then
very
beyond the reenactments, I think also like just showing us like if like for example, in one of the scenes, um, they were, I think it who was it, David Harris was talking about, I guess he was asked about like the time frame or like the questioning or how his engagement with the police as far as how to testify, and he mentions like, yeah, I'm just a kid, so like, they're questioning me, they're telling me what time the crimes happen, and I just pretty much like add on from there. And at the same time, Morris is like, as we're hearing this, Morris is showing us a reenactment of who would be Harris at the movie theater, and then specifically like shoots the clock, and it's not midnight, right? Like Harris was talking about. It's what was it, like 10 o'clock, 2 hours prior.
mhm.
Um, so I thought that was very interesting. How like he's like through imagery, he's contradicting what certain social actors are saying, and even some one of the detectives, I think, was talking about uh, the type of show that Randall Adams might have been watching when he got home, and it's completely different from what the one Morris is showing. Morris is showing us the Carol Burnett show, and is showing us the time 9:30, when in fact, the detective has it wrong, and Morris is showing us the evidence. So yeah, it's really interesting, like how he uses the visuals, like the visuals themselves are contradicting. Like it's not just the social actors contradicting themselves and what they're saying. It's also like the visuals. Like he's adding to that line of evidence. He's adding, like, putting the huge emphasis on these contradictions through visuals.
Mhm. Yeah.
And let's see the next question: what is the general negative attitude towards reenactment according to Morris? So on page 5, on
Okay.
Morris's essay, he writes, critics argue that the use of reenactment suggests a callous disregard on the part of the filmmaker for what is true. I don't
Mhm.
agree. Some reenactments serve the truth, others subvert it. And he also mentions that there's the difference is the uh, underlying intention to deceive, which is also on page 5.
Yeah.
So yeah,
There's a lot of good stuff on page 5. Um, I mean, it's only bad if you're recreating something and nothing like it's meant you're just making things false. Whereas the Thin Blue Lines case, it's recreating something that doesn't add up and showing the hypocrisy of witnesses. So it depends on like again, you can even say the rhetoric as well, like of what the films are trying to achieve. This film's trying to show you like poke holes of like this case that doesn't add up, whereas using certain reenactments just to deceive someone is like a different situation, and it just depends how it's used at the end of the day. It's a
Right.
really hard case. Like, there's no like you can make positive cases about like, oh well yeah, but you can also make a lot of negative cases like, yeah, you could fabricate truth. And for me it's a very gray line, so I really can't say there's negatives, but there's a lot of positives. So that's all I have to say personally.
Yeah, and I think you're right about like it's definitely how it's used. They give us the example of this film, Mighty Times, and how
Hmm.
they were questioned. This film was questioned about its use of
Yeah,
reenactments and how there was no dividing line and no disclaimer about what was actually a reenactment or what was real footage and what was a reenactment. They're just kind of blended together. So
yeah,
like Morris is saying, this underlying intention to deceive. Um, and I think the critics were, I think, just very traditional in their in what they believe a documentary should do, because they're saying that it's a disregard of the truth on the part of the filmmaker, but they're assuming that there is no truth to be found here because they're used to a different type of structured documentary. They're used to this expository mode where
yeah,
filmmakers just gonna talk about and tell you, and like the narrative is like basically the visuals are basically putting an emphasis on what's being said,
yeah,
and this we don't see this in the thin blue line. We see the opposite. What this social actor is saying, the visual says something else.
yeah. And personally, like when I hear about documentaries, like first of all, documentary is not even a genre; it's a medium. So it's just you gotta do the core aspects of the medium. That's all you need to do. But doesn't mean you can't like play with the format. As long as it's providing information and it's not like fabricating truth. I believe you can make a documentary however you want. Like there's brilliant films like Tower or even Feels Good Man. Like they use like mixed media just to tell the story, and I feel like it documentaries need to progress beyond than just telling how it is and that's it. Like, yeah, it's great, but if you really want people to be interested, then you really need to evolve the
And that,
medium at the end of the day.
yeah, and
So
if you remember, that's exactly what Nichols said. In the earlier chapters, that's exactly the evolution of documentary has been people expanding and adding to it,
um
different ways of approaching documentary.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
and, and long as it's appropriate for the subject matter as well, which that's the big I think that's the big takeaway of how you make a good documentary is as long as the style is appropriate for the documentary and its subject matter, then go for it. Like I even have some documentaries I don't know why I like watching, and I'm just like, well, it's for this specific style for this specific story, and I'm just like, yeah, it's great. And I think that's how you should do it when you're presenting at least a good amount of the truth. You can't. I mean, documentaries don't present the truth 100%, but this is just the presentation and how they approach it is all that matters at the end of the day.
Right. And our next question is, how does Morris justify his own use of it in films?
Yeah, I actually saw this in kind of the same like page, and it continues as trade six. Basically, he's saying like, well, it wasn't basically saying it's not a cinema birthday documentary that got Randall out of prison or anything. It's a film that reenacted important details of a crime. It was an investigation, and and it has to be done with cameras.
Right.
Basically, what he's saying is like he has to recreate these details just to prove like all like the testimonies from everyone and how each like I said every small detail doesn't add up and hurts the case at the end. And I think it's important. I think personally, I think Mars was he's really justified what we said in that statement of this film because
Yeah.
I didn't feel like he was deceiving me. I just feel like, yeah, he's presenting the same core idea with different small details, and I'm just like, wow, it doesn't make sense at the end of the day. And wow, these
I'm gonna,
people really screwed up this case.
Chris, I'm sorry. I'm gonna press pause for just one moment. Okay, sorry about that. I just had to talk to my um, roommate about some of the noise.
That's fine.
um, but yeah, and then yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And then he also uses the reference to Collingwood. And according to Collingwood on page 17, history is a reenactment of the past in the mind. Um,
Hmm.
and then also, history is a combination of evidence and our attempts to rethink the thoughts that produced it. So it's, Collingwood's basically saying we have to reenact. That's exactly how we approach history. That's exactly how we think. That's exactly how we're
Yeah,
looking back, is reenactments in the mind. So
yeah,
it
like
would
if
make perfect sense to if you're bringing up like a past event, like we're doing in the Thin Blue Line, this
mhm.
murder, then reenactments have to happen
Yeah, I do agree. Like history era
to,
reenactments, even like the epic poems are like reenactments of certain historic events. I mean, they're different at the end result, but it is like a recorded document of like a certain event at the end of the day. So, and you can apply that with documentary too, with reenactments.
yeah, definitely. And then let's see. Yeah. So how does he justify, like, basically just it's the way you're using. I mean, you have to.
Mm.
He's saying you have to use reenactments,
Yeah, yeah, that's basically what he said.
and it's the way you use them, right? It's like he's
Hmm.
not trying to deceive, and I think that's part of the next question. How does Morris distinguish his use of reenactments from those found in mighty times? And on page 5, he says it's this underlying intention to deceive. Uh,
Yeah.
so Morris isn't presenting these reenactments as truths. And we see that if we pay attention to reenactments, we're seeing there. If you put the reenactments together, you can see that they contradict. Like in one reenactment, the female cop gets out of the car when they stop Harris or the car. And in another reenactment, she's in the car drinking her chocolate malt. So, how could anybody take these as truth? Which is how he starts actually his essay. He mentions that somebody asked him it, you know, that if he was there, how could it happen that he was there the day of the murder, which I thought was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Let's see. And then he also says on page 6, this was an investigation
Yeah.
which was done
Yeah.
through the camera.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, it's like I felt like he was both detective and attorney, like in a case, and presenting it all together. And I think what's really beautiful about this film is how a lot of this evidence wasn't, you know, available to like the jury, um, or to any particular people in one room. And like, had anybody seen all this evidence, I think it would have been pretty clear that that Randall Adams didn't commit the crime. And I think it's pretty beautiful, like this use of documentary, how it's like bringing all this evidence together into one film, and not just presenting it as such. This is the evidence, and this is why you should think this way. It's like
Mhm.
there's a slow progression to that, where um, yeah, it's not just presenting directly. We're being convinced, we're persuaded through the evidence, through how
Mhm.
it's presented.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the reenactments or he says in page 7, the reenactments capture the most important details, which I thought was like such a beautiful like use of close up, which is very unique. Well, actually, unique to the film medium, and how it's like this laser attention to just like one piece of detail.
I agree. Yeah.
And then our last question: given that rhetoric is a practice of persuading or influencing a person's way of thinking, and Morris's justification for his use of reenactment, how do the reenactments impact your understanding of the film's representation of the murder investigation? I think we pretty much just talked about that.
Yeah.
And like
uh,
me, it was just that this role that he takes on of detective slash attorney.
yeah, he just wanted to solve an unsolved case despite
Right.
being solved.
And I say detective and attorney because he's not just coming in like with an attorney. It's like, this is the truth and this is why you should, it's this detective. He's like discovering it's almost like he's presenting the clues as if like we're the detectives, like as we're discovering one by one. This happened, this leads me to this, and this leads me to that. And this particular story or this social actor story leads us to this other social actor. So it's like there's this definitely these characteristics of the detective, right?
Yeah,
And then
it does work. Yeah, because they actually got the case
right,
reconsidered again.
yeah, and those are the film noir elements that I really enjoyed in the film.
Hmm.
Um, I'm thinking of like the killers or out of the past where it's like constant like search and like um, questioning, and then this person leads you to another, and I just thought it was beautiful.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean this approach, this type of like reflexive approach that Morris takes, I think is very effective in what he set out to do, which is to prove this man's innocence. Any last closing remarks, Chris?
Um,
All right.
well,
No.
no, I do. Yeah, I think this film just. I mean, if we're going to a lot of details about this film of what it is and what does, I think that's the film really achieved it. Then if we're still discussing about it to this day about the purpose of this film and the rhetorics, because I think it hits the nail on everything. Like, I mean, I don't want to say it's 100% perfect, but it's a near perfect documentary of like truth and like manipulation. And I feel like this is a rare case of good documentary filmmaking that actually stands out, and you actually feel enticed to actually engage with subject matter compared to like floating heads just talking to you guys
Right.
about this is what happened. And I yeah, I applaud Morris for making this film because it changed everything when it comes to investigating crime.
Yeah, we become very much a part of the discovery um, of what the filmmaker is presenting, as opposed to like other modes like the expository, where it's more like I'm here to teach you this, and you know, it's more of that teacher student kind of dynamic. Versus here, it's like let's go on this journey together.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right, Chris. Well, it was nice chatting with you.
Yeah, it was very nice. Yeah, it was a very interesting chat.
All righty. So then I'll see you next class.
All right, see ya.